is David Wells, and he's well known as an educational advisor, particularly for the Diocese of Portsmouth, has given his life to helping and equipping and resourcing the church, particularly in the arena of education. He's well known as a conference speaker, but more importantly than that, he's a husband to Alison and a father to 3 kids. He's the first of our beggars sharing his bread. So if you would warmly welcome David Wells.
Thank you. Thank you. Those of you who know me well know that I can't stand still. I want to say thank you for coming, and I want to say why I'm here. If you looked on the website, and some of you did, the word attached to this was festival. And what I want to say to you is I will go anywhere where people are gathering to explore and celebrate Catholic theology. Why? Because I think it's good news. But I like the word festival because the thing I'm interested in really is the fact that we should be enjoying ourselves. All right, theology was never meant to place us into the disposition of chore. All right, this is good news, and if it's right, it helps us to live our lives better. It's practical. That's why I like something that calls itself a pastoral review, or anything with pastoral in the title, because this is meant to make our lives better. So I'm here because it's a festival. And one of the reasons I like that title is that what I'd like to encourage you to do is to see it as, instead of indigestion, all right, see it as tapas. All right, that the workshops are humble, they're well led, they're rich, but see them as small portions. And if I may say, this is a bit naughty, but this is my enthusiasm beginning to ooze out already. Go to the least familiar thing and surprise yourself. Forgive me, it's none of my business. But you know, sometimes it's very tempting to pick the thing you know about and then sit there and go, yes, I agree with that. And actually discover that all you were doing was receiving what you already had. Have a little look on those titles and pick something that you'd think, well, I'm not even sure I'm interested. And then allow yourself to be surprised. The last little tip before we begin is this. I think of St. Francis de Sales, flies attracted to a spoonful of honey. Over the course of 2 days, there's a wealth here. Don't try to absorb it all. I think there's a tendency, because of the way we were formed and the way we grew up, to try and master things. Try going after the honey. Like, look for one thing in every workshop. One fact, one quote, one idea, one prayer that can mature itself. Go after the honey, spoonful of honey, not a barrel full of vinegar, right? I always think, I get in the car and I think, well, I've lost 90% of that already. Well, of course you have. So go after the honey. There's honey here for us all, and this is a festival. So the first thing I'm going to say, obviously, to you, if this works, and it doesn't want to already, there we go. Maybe I've got to stand somewhere else. Is just try and relax over the course of the day. Just put down all the things you brought with you, the things you should be doing, the importance and the weight of the responsibilities you carry, the mild anxieties that linger like gossamer. See if you can just put them down for a while and allow yourself to immerse yourself into this, because it's good news. And the last thing to just say by way of introduction is welcome. And thank you for coming. Get on with it then. All right. So here we go. Accompaniment as a pastoral strategy. I'm very conscious that I've got a little bit less time than I thought I'd had. So I'm going to rush this a little bit, if you don't mind, and I'm going to start on the tube. So the thing that we haven't got time to really explore this, but the thing I really enjoy is the relationship between our tradition and what happens to us. In my early career, that was a mixture of, I think, what the church would call catechesis and for me, pedagogy. How do you absorb, learn, and reflect on what happens to you? It's how those two things relate to each other. So I'm just going to take you into a tiny experience, and I want you to consider how you're reacting as I tell you this story. It's only a few minutes, but it goes like this. I'm on the Northern Line. I get on the train, and it's packed. There's no room. I'm not a Londoner, but I understand enough not to intrude on people's space. And we pull into the next station, and a gentleman gets on the train, and then he does this. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to talk about the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, I want you to be on the train for a minute. All right? And then he moves into some brief description about salvation, and then there's something about sin, and then there's something about hell. Now, I just want to ask you how you're feeling. The interesting thing for me is I am fascinated by whether what matters to me can matter to other people. In fact, if I look back over my life, I think that turned out to be my career. Can what matters to me matter to the people I love, to the people around me, and to strangers? This man is on the same mission. But there's something about this that's leaving me uncomfortable. The woman in front of me is sitting on a seat with a small child. I see her take his hand. It's all right. It's all right. It's safe. She's communicating through her hand. It's safe. The two girls standing in front of me, as I learn from listening a Spanish, they're giggling. And one is telling the other that he's a Christian. A gentleman next to me raises his newspaper in defence. And we arrive into the next station, and suddenly silence returns, and I realise that he's left the train. And then in the carriage is a corporate sense of relief. Now here's my issue. We may have a different understanding of theology, but he's a man of courage and conviction. He's also on a mission. He understands his duty and his responsibility as a Christian is to proclaim the gospel. He might emphasise it differently to me, and he might have a different way of sharing it. But I am sitting there profoundly uncomfortable by what just happened. Forgive me. This is not a gimmick, and I'm not going to indulge myself. Just tell the person next to you, are you admiring of this man, or are you irritated by him? Just tell the person next to you, which would be your reaction as you sat on that train that day? Just briefly, just a brief conversation. Now, I'm going to suggest to you, forgive me, I don't, and the answer is, and I'm not going to do that. But what I want to do is just to say, is he doing the right thing? Is he? Now, here's my thing. I spent some time reflecting on this, and Pope Francis now, currently, but don't think it's unique to him. If you trace it back, you will find it. There's nothing new here. But Pope Francis, at the moment, is talking to that situation. Now, he's not saying the man's bad, wrong, or anything, but he's saying there's a better way to do it than that. And we'll come back to that in a minute, and I'm going to suggest its accompaniment. Now, there's always a danger with a word that becomes a buzzword, that then becomes popular, becomes a thing of the moment, and then we forget it. So that's not this. I'm not going to teach you anything you don't know, but it goes a little bit like this. I was reflecting upon why that man irritated me, because after all, he is at least proclaiming. And he has conviction, and I realise when I look back in my life now, I wish there was more conviction in the world. There's far too much desiring of popularity. You know, my daughter, when she was just 14, she said to me once, why do politicians only apologise when they get caught? You know, she was saying to me, by the time she was 14, she was saying to me, do people who lead just want to be popular? Where's the conviction? I lived in mining towns in the 1980s. I didn't personally like Margaret Thatcher, but I admired her conviction. See? So the question is, where's the voice of conviction? And here is a man, at least, offering conviction. And I go, well, amen to that. Here's my problem. It wasn't the problem I thought it was until I reflected on it. And my problem with that man is that he got off the train. That's my problem. I thought it was the opposite. But it turned out to be, no. Know my name. Get to know me. Let me find in you virtue. And then tell me what you believe. But don't shout at me and then walk off as if your job's done. I discovered with a little bit of prayer and reflection was not that the man is bad, of course. Who am I to judge? But that he got off the train. No relationship, just message. No relationship, just message. That's not how, forgive me, I understand Catholics evangelise. In fact, we used to joke with my mum's generation that if you wanted to evangelise somebody, you married them. Right? Yeah, and then you wear them down. And then 30 years later, they become a Catholic. And then I think that's exactly what happened to me dad. He didn't stand a chance. Because after 25 years of living with me mum, he gave in. All right? And he loved the church. But actually, he had to meet its virtue. It's interesting that in Amoris Laetitia, one of the statements Pope Francis offers us is, no more shouting. Isn't that an interesting statement to have in a document of the church? Don't just shout at the world. It doesn't work. Now, I'm running out of time already. Have you noticed in Pope Francis's documents, actually, they're not unique to his documents, but we begin normally with a bit of a penitential rite. Most of the documents, first chapter or second chapter, don't begin with beration. It doesn't begin with we're bad people or let's beat ourselves up, but they often, there's a sort of subtext that goes, do you know something? It could be better than this. It could be better than this. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a penitential rite about accompaniment. You know, there's a way that looks like it works, and there's a way that looks like it doesn't work. Do you understand? You just go, oh, no, I can't even tell you why that's not working, but don't do that. Oh, dear, okay. We need to be humble and realistic, writes Pope Francis in Amoris Laetitia, acknowledging that at times the way we present our beliefs and treat other people, now get this, has helped to contribute to today's problematic situation. He goes on, now I love this because it goes right the way back to St. Augustine. I love it. We need a healthy dose of self-criticism. Now listen, forgive me, the people who taught me were good people. They include me mum and dad, and I love them dearly, but they didn't get the balance between healthy dose and criticism. Do you understand? I was taught sin in such a critical critique and without the healthy dose that I didn't properly understand sin until I grew up and discovered how important it is. A healthy dose of self-criticism is really important for us. Why? Because it takes us into a place of mercy. Once you know that you need a healthy dose of self-criticism, you're going to be more compassionate in the person you meet who needs a dose of criticism. Now, you know, this is a remarkable way. This is how I teach it to teachers. But I say, look, this is me looking in a mirror, right? I can fool myself. You know, Alison and I have always chatted about this. She said to me, these are her words, not mine. She said she didn't know many women who look in a mirror and immediately like what they see. She said, I immediately go to what I'd change, Alison says. And then we laugh because we said we didn't know many men who look in a mirror and don't like what they see. Because, you know, I can still do this at 56, you see. You see, and there's a sense in which I can delude myself. And what Pope Francis says is, do you know something? It's not wrong to sometimes sit in a church. This isn't unhealthy, to occasionally sit amongst the people of God and go, I think we were born for better than this. That's not the priest is bad or the choir's bad or we're bad. It's just, we lift up our hearts to the Lord. Alleluia, alleluia. And you go, really? Were we not born for a better song than this to sing? Was it not meant to well up from somewhere else inside us? And occasionally that ache is in us all. It can be in the priest just as much as the people. So what the Pope does at the beginning of his documents beautifully is he said, that's the healthy place to situate yourself. Not so that you berate yourself or feel bad about yourself, but so that you are in a place of mercy. You see, because the other place is different to that. Now, the phrase he uses a lot in Amoris Laetitia, but he's used it interestingly in his recent exhortation, is idealisation. The opposite, if you like, to accompaniment is this. Excessive idealisation, especially when we've failed to inspire trust in God's grace, has not helped to make vocation more desirable and attractive, but the opposite. Now, this is when you don't start in a place of mercy. This is a fantastic sentence in Amoris Laetitia. Families are not a problem. They are first and foremost an opportunity. Now I'm going to put a little wager for you. Let's do this. I'm going to put a wager that in chapter 1 or chapter 2 of the forthcoming document on young people, there will be a sentence which reads, young people are not a problem. They are first and foremost an opportunity. Why? Because if you begin with the position that young people are a problem, you are already judging. It's judgment before mercy. So what you've done is you've idealised. I hear people, they say, when we were young, we climbed trees. And you go, no, you didn't. You climbed 3 trees in 18 years, and you remember that. Actually, you were just as capable as being bored. The idea somehow, there's a fatal mistake that we make, that somehow we are better than them. And then one day that communicates itself, not that we're bad people, but what it does is it makes people think we're better than them. And that's what this Pope's fighting. So what he's doing is he's saying, mercy, mercy, these people are not a problem for you to solve. They're an opportunity for you to minister to. Stop it. Stop talking about young people like they're a problem. Because when you do that, you're straight into the position of judgment. Not that you'd ever intend that, but it's what happens. So I am coming into land. I'm still on my introduction, and I've got 25 minutes to go. So it goes a little bit like this. Marion, forgive me those of you who were here last week. Marion, my sister, I'm the youngest of 3. The older 2 don't go anywhere near a church. We had the same parents who loved each other, both devout Catholics. We have the same gene pool, and 40 years later, I'm going to church and they're not. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that I'm better than them? Should I even think like that? The scriptures warned me against it. Be careful, David. Thieves and prostitutes are ahead of you in the queue. Be careful. So when my sister goes through a bad time, have you ever noticed how tricky evangelisation is in your own families? It's much harder than on the tube train. No, it is. It is. I can get on a tube train and shout at people, and I'm not afraid to do it if I was asked to. Whether it's right or not is another issue. But try it at a family party. Ooh. Politics, sensitivities, competitiveness, brokenness. You know about it. So I'm with my sister. Now you have to understand she's the eldest of 3, and I'm her kid brother who turned out to be the favourite. All right? No, I'm not, but do you understand? So I'm saying to her, she says to me, we're talking about her pain, And I said, Marion, I was careful. I'm not sure about this, but when I'm suffering, I go to church. You have to be so careful around the people you love. And she said to me, now this is interesting, she said to me, I can't go back there. And I said, you know you can. She said, I can't. And I said, why can't you go back there? And she says, you know why. And I said, I don't know why. Come with me. She says, I'll walk into that church and they'll look at me and they'll give me that look. And I said, what look? And she said, you know the look. The look that goes, oh, where have you been? I said, Marion, you stopped going to church 30 years ago. Everybody who looked at you like that is dead. Well, they are. Nearly all of them. But she's locked in the opinion of the church, which is, we go to church and we think we're better than her. Now, we know from our penitential rite that that's not what we're doing. But this Pope is saying to the church, in all of his documents, do you know what we've done? Not by intent, not consciously, but we've given the world the impression that we're somehow better than them. And so instead of encountering mercy, they encounter judgment. Now, by the way, judgment and mercy theologically need each other, but that's another talk. The really interesting thing is, what do you begin with? Where do you start? That's why the man's mistake was to get off the train. He wasn't prepared to pay the cost of a relationship. It's hard work. So, no, I'm trying to get this sentence banned. Are you ready? Don't begin. Please don't say this to young people. And I hear it all the time, and often in a church context. Do not say to young people, these are the best years of your life. Can you just not do that, please? Have you any idea how depressing that is? What you're saying to a young person is, if you think it's bad now, it's only going to get worse. Amen. Now, here's the problem of idealisation. So here's my family. That's Alison at the... Oh, thank you. Okay, but there's a beware, all right? There's a snake or a shark in the water, and it goes like this. You can look at a picture like that, and you can go, oh, lovely family. See, most of the time we hate each other. We don't, of course, but it goes a little bit more like this. You can even look at a picture like that and imagine it's ideal. Understand? So it's not as if we try to do this to people. They will do this to themselves. You look at like a little picture like that and you go, oh, that's a family that's together. Right? There are a myriad of problems in our family all the time. You know, this very day, my mum's been admitted into hospital, doesn't want to be there, and I'm falling out with my brothers and sisters. If my wife was at this conference, she would be sitting on the front row looking at me going, when are you going to listen to your own talk? She wouldn't be admiring. So what we have to do is to be very careful about what we imagine this looks like, because you see, once you get bombarded with these images, it isn't long before somebody says, come to our family event in our parish, and you don't come, not because anybody's told you this, but because you think that's what a family looks like. And you and your partner split up 25 years ago, and you're thinking, will there be anybody else there on their own? And then all of a sudden, all the broken, vulnerable, discarded families are not there, not because anybody intended it to be that way, but because we presented an image of the church that was too tidy. Have you ever been to somebody's house and it's too tidy? Do you know what I mean? Now, sometimes I get the impression from our liturgy that we need to be so tidy that the very people we want to attract feel uncomfortable. Now, nobody sets out to do that. That's not the teaching of the church. Nobody believes that's what they're doing. But all of a sudden, if you think there's a rule you don't know, you'll do nothing for fear of breaking it. So suddenly grown-ups who hold big responsibilities in their lives are paralysed at church. And they don't volunteer for anything because they might think there's something they don't know and this isn't a place to make mistakes. And nobody does that on purpose. But by the time you're 4 or 5, you've pretty much picked that up. Sorry for being repetitive, but I've got to do this. She was 4 years old when she came to me and she said, "Dad, here's a church, here's a steeple, open the doors and here are the people." And I said, "I used to play that, Emily." She says, "I've made my own up." 4. She goes, "Here's a church, here's a steeple, open the doors and here are the people." And then she went, "Shh," to her own fingers. Shh. She was 4. She was 4, and I wasn't going to do that to her. Now, look, I know I'm with learned, skillful people here. That little girl has a divine origin and an eternal destiny. God gave her to me to love. By the time she was 4, her impression was of God was to sit still and be quiet. Now, by the time she's 14, she's got a problem with that. By the time she's 24, she's got to work out whether she's false or real at church. And nobody, including me, meant to do that. And this is not a liberal agenda about come to mass on roller skates. It really isn't. But somehow we create an image we never intend to give simply by polishing it. You might be interested to know the bishops in Canada said this to their Catholic schools. "We've also heard your feelings of confusion and inadequacy when faced with some of the problems your children are going through. Catholic schools do not expect to deal with perfect students or perfect parents." Now, why would they have to write that if that wasn't a problem? Just the idea that somehow we present ourselves as sorted when actually our Catholic communities were meant to be places where we brought our confusion, our doubt, our mess, our irritation. So somehow we've done something. And Nicholas Lash, this sentence really haunts me, but I think it's still powerful to this day. It's 20 years old. He wrote, "Christian beliefs and practices have become not unknown, but apparently unintelligible to considerable numbers of people. Most people think they know what Christianity is about, and they don't." Now, the reason I like that sentence is I'm here today because I think that's true. I think people have the wrong impression of us. So, I have got a quarter of an hour left to do the other half of the talk. Just before we do, so okay, if that's the penitential rite, what does Pope Francis say as a response to this? Just say to the person next to you, "I agree with this, I don't agree with this, he's troubled me, he's not, I think that's really clear, he's making sense." Or even say, "Oh dear, I'm a bit tired, is it going to be like this all day?" Just with each other, just for a couple of minutes, and then we'll do our last 10, 12 minutes together. Just brief chat. Okay. So, I've just been told we can do 5 minutes over, which is really important. Now, if you're leading a workshop, that's not going to eat into your time. We're just taking 5 minutes out of lunch. Is that all right? Yeah. So, we've got a quarter of an hour to go. And thank you for being patient. So now, forgive me, in that context, that penitential rite, which is part of the opening chapter to Evangelii Gaudium, but you also see it in Amoris Laetitia, and now we're going to see it in our most recent exhortation. But just notice how the Pope Francis has this thing, it keeps echoing through his documents. It's about keep it ordinary. Now, he doesn't mean mundane, all right? It's the wrong way to look at this. It goes, no family can be fruitful if it sees itself as overly different or set apart. To avoid this risk, we should remember that Jesus' own family, so full of grace and wisdom, didn't appear unusual. All right, that's the carpenter's son. Like, people didn't walk around going, here's the Holy Family coming. Shh. No, but think about the way we treat holiness. In his latest exhortation, the Pope is saying, really quite powerfully, you are holy, and so is your life. Stop waiting for the halo. It's almost as if we've made holiness unintentionally too otherworldly. So what this Pope is doing very, very consistently is saying, keep your head in prayer, keep your feet in the dust. All right, this is about the kitchen sink. And when it stops being about that, it's not helpful. It's just tidy. Now, again, when I'm working with teachers or catechists or what, sort of daft ideas like this really help. I say, now, which one of those looks like a saint to you? And people either go, well, all of them, of course, all of them, or they'll say, well, none of them, or whatever. But actually, the important thing is to say, Cara Badano's parents, were at lengths to say she was an awkward, irritating, sullen teenager. She didn't walk round floating. And the church blesses her for her faithfulness in times of suffering. But it didn't stop her being ordinary. But somehow the world allows that separation, like a divorce, and imagines we're all walking around in some state of otherworldliness. Now actually, the lovely thing about staying with a church community is we know we're not like that, don't we? But actually, how did we communicate the other to other people? So in his latest exhortation, he's actually saying to the church, will you not be afraid of being holy, because it's not what you think it is. It doesn't mean you have to... It actually goes on, it will take away none of your energy, vitality or joy. He's actually having to say to the church, don't be afraid of being holy, it's not going to make you sullen and miserable. But why would you have to say that? It's fascinating. Fascinated by it. Do you know, I don't think people realise, I think this is one of the reasons why probably his major homily, Pope Francis, is joy. Cheer up. Like with the churches walking around like it's got the weight of the world on its shoulders, and it hasn't actually. But how many meetings do you go to that begin with, it's a terrible world and it's getting worse. And you go, yeah, let's pray for it. And you go, really? What happened to our joy? When was the last time misery attracted anybody? I don't know. It's an interesting thing that he highlights in his most recent exhortation, a number of saints. But I love this about St. Therese of Lisieux. Could you practice being cheerful on your own? And most people, when I talk about the gift of joy and cheerfulness, they start talking about the pub. And you go, no, that's having a good time. That's all right. Have a good time at the pub. But like next Lent, instead of giving up something, why don't you do 10 minutes of singular cheerfulness? See if it does anything. Practice being cheerful on your own. It's a completely different experience. No, there goes that thought again. Push that out. I have a lot of reasons to be happy. These are our days. We haven't got many. Sorry, that sounds miserable, though. You know the balance. It goes a bit like this. My dad was dying and I had 6 weeks of knowing, which gave us a wonderful advantage. So I was able to have good conversations. And I said to him, as a man of wisdom, my dad, a man of few words, and I said to him, of all the things you taught us growing up, what do you want us to remember when you can't speak to us anymore? And he came out with this. It wasn't what I expected at all. He said to me, son, he said, don't take yourself too seriously. And then he added, you're going to die. But can I just say, that's wisdom. Like, Dave, what's the point of wearing the world's problems as if they're mine? And again, I'm just going to skip this. I don't know whether you've come across Ollie Gibbs. This is a very naughty website. Naughty in the sense that the museums don't like this, but he's done an app that he's trying to cheer up the world. Now, this isn't the church, all right? I just like it. So he's taken a lot of classical art and done this to it. Now, I know he shouldn't, but it's not a bad illustration of what Pope Francis is saying to the church. Will you do two things? One is cheer up, and the other thing is, will you tell your face? Because it's not good enough to just cheer up, that somehow we have to communicate it as joyful messages. Beautiful paintings, I know that you know them well, and I know you shouldn't do this to them, but look how a smile changes an image. And ask yourself, what do most people think they'll get if they come to church? And is one less holy than the other? Oh, I love this one. This is my favourite. There's loads of them on the website. This is my favourite. Look what happens there. Isn't that interesting? How much a face changes. You know, and when I've taken people to Mass for the first time in their lives, we haven't had conversations about transubstantiation. We've had a longing for the human smile, which is accompaniment. It's not the same as shouting at people on trains. Even Rembrandt got the treatment. But enough of that nonsense. So just to finish, forgive me, I know I'm talking to learned people, so forgive me when I'm teaching you something you know already, but just go with this for a minute. I've often enjoyed this passage, and it's often given to people who are in times of great stress. Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And it's a very reassuring passage for our culture, which is working too hard. And so we all carry stress and pain, and sometimes a passage like this is a great release to us. The interesting thing for me personally is that I grew up with that sort of image, given to us partly by the Victorians, but you only have to watch a classical movie, of what a yoke would look like, the weight of responsibility. And the Lord saying to us, look, you know, take my yoke on. It's not like that. But actually, as I got older, and then you start reading, and then you explore the scriptures, and you look into exegesis, you begin to meet people who can open up for that for you. And a lot of scripture scholars would tell us that a first century Jewish yoke looked like that. It was very rare to have a singular yoke. That to carry anything, you would have carried it in this manner. A lot of people believe that that's what Jesus was talking about when he gave us that image. For my yoke is easy. Why is my yoke easy? And why would you learn from me carrying it? Because I'd be carrying it too. Because we'd be side by side. Because I'd be the ox and you'd be the donkey. That's why my yoke's easy. Because I'm right there, shoulder to shoulder, carrying your pain with you. That's a first century Jewish yoke right there. And this is an image of accompaniment. An image that we both experience and then take under when it comes to our neighbour. Now there's a whole wealth of teaching on accompaniment. It mustn't become a thing in its own right. It's not new. But actually that's an image there of Catholic evangelisation. If you want to bring somebody with the grace of God into communion with the church, you're going to have to help them to belong, to love, to know your name, to bear the weight of their trivia, to be patient, to be patient, to be patient, and to wait for the question. It's the opposite to ideals shouted at people on a tube train. So, please keep your eye out. There's some lovely stuff coming out. Bill Hibbs has written some lovely stuff on accompaniment. Google him and have a look at his simple pamphlets on accompaniment. They're quite beautiful, quite well written, and quite worthy of a look. And I think, given our timing, why don't we just stop there for a minute for the last time this morning. I've just got one more tiny little story I want to tell you before we finish. Before I do that, just has that helped? Has that challenged? Has that affirmed? Has that been familiar? Just a brief comment on what you've just heard. One more story, and then we'll go to our workshops, if that's all right. Just 2 minutes with each other. 4 minutes to go, and let me finish with this, because actually, I've got halfway through the presentation. Can I just say, keep your eye out for a growing theology on accompaniment. It's a beautiful, rich, developing theology that's coming out of reflection from Pope Francis's exhortations, and particularly Amoris Laetitia. After the immediate reaction to the document, things settle, and then its wisdom emerges. And I think that the pastoral wisdom of that document is accompaniment. And there's lots of material out there. But do look up Bill Hibbs, she's worth it. Sorry? Bill Hibbs. I tell you what I'll do is I'll put his name out here and the reference. In fact, I'll put a copy of it out here just so people can look at it later. It's only an example. It's one of many. Just to finish, I always love trying to put the principle into a vignette. So I'm just going to finish with a vignette, if you forgive me. I've got a whole collection of these, about 80 of them. This is one of my favourites. So I've been working with the governors and teachers in a particular school in the southwest, primary school in Torquay. At the end, a lady comes up to me. You've probably met her in 1,000 different faces. And she comes up to me and she says to me, she says, "David, I like your talk." These are her words, not mine. And then she adds, because I wouldn't say them, she says, but then she says, "I'm just an old woman." All right? And then she adds rather tragically, she says, "Nobody even sees me." Right? She says, "I walk in a room and nobody notices." So there's a little bit of residual anger, perhaps resentment, but a certain nobility about her, of course. And she's a good woman, of course, and she's on the governing body and she wants to help. And she comes out with a question that is beautiful, really. She says, "What can I do? You're talking about helping people, and people get all inspired about becoming, part of the church." She says, nobody even listens to me." And then she added, this is a lovely little twist, which I thought was gorgeous. She said, "Trust me." She said, "There was a time I walked into a room and people noticed." I loved that about her. There was the spark, you see, there was the spark. And then I said, "What do you like to do?" And she said, "I like to knit." She began a knitting course on a Friday afternoon in that school from 2:00. The children who came to her knitting classes on a Friday afternoon, who'd never seen knitting before, were turning up with the kids who didn't want to be in the classrooms. So it wasn't long before Christine became very popular amongst the teaching staff, because the teachers were losing the kids who didn't want to be there. They were all joining Christine for knitting on a Friday afternoon. She was teaching these children knitting. And then all of a sudden, something quite remarkable happens. She says, she told me this story afterwards. She says, "I'm sitting next to this little girl." You see, this is not getting off the tube train. "I'm sitting next to this little girl," and she says, "My dad doesn't come home anymore." And Christine said, "I'm very sorry to hear that." And she said, "Oh no, it's much better." She said, "No more shouting. No more shouting." But here was Christine's point. She said to me, "I realised that somebody could see me." Now, I've nearly finished. What that triggered in me was, I've got a daughter and 2 sons. All right? My daughter can come up to me and say, "Dad, we need to talk." All right? She's 19. She can come up to me and say that. My sons can't, for some reason. So my sons wait for a moment, normally in the car, when we're driving, and Sam will say, "Dad, I think I'm in love." And I realise he wants to talk. But what I discovered about my son is, he'll talk to me when I'm not looking at him. Now, he needs something there. It's something to do with not feeling exposed. All right? What this woman was learning was accompaniment is shoulder to shoulder. It's not face to face. There's an important disposition there. It goes, I'm going to walk with you as Christ does under that yoke. Shoulder to shoulder, side by side. And in your timing, you'll say, Dad, I think I'm in love. Now, I have done, but I want to finish with this picture. I want you to look at that picture and ask yourself, who is accompanying who in that picture? Because once you start to think like this, everyone gets healed. The giver and the receiver. It's not one-way traffic. And actually what those children are doing is giving that woman her dignity back. And what that woman is doing is giving those children their dignity back. And that is accompaniment. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why you don't get off the train. Amen. Amen. Thank you.